Hi everyone, I'm Jordan,
And I'm Kelty.
and we want to welcome you to the YWAMERS podcast.
We're excited to have you here.
On this podcast, we interview youth with a mission who are everywhere reforming the spheres, aka YWAMERS, in the hope that our listeners will be inspired on how they too can be missionaries in their everyday life. Before we jump into today's podcast with Anna, I just want to let you all know we have an online course right now designed specifically to help YWAMers after they have left the organization of YWAM to thrive as YWAMers in the spheres. It's a 5-week online course and enrollment closes this Friday at midnight. So jump onto our website and check that out if you're interested. But for now, let's jump into the podcast with Anna. Hi everyone, Jordan and Kelty here.
Hello.
In today's interview, we are talking with Anna Cavoto, who came by referral from our first interview with Christina Mastrangelo-Martin. So we're pretty excited to have Anna here today. Hello, Anna.
Hello. So great to be with you guys.
So how do you know Christina and why do you think she referred you?
Oh, that's a loaded question.
That wasn't in the questions we told you about.
No,
So
like
this is
that's just,
spontaneous.
oh no. So Christina and I were roommates in Pasadena, California, and we were part of the Circuit Rider YWAM community there in Pasadena, and we were roommates for 2 years. And I'm guessing that she probably referred me because we had this conversation a lot about how does it look like to take what we've learned from YWAM, knowing that God put us in YWAM for a time and a purpose, but also realizing that he had more for us outside of missions, like traditional missions work. And me feeling called to work in government and her feeling called to work in entertainment and Hollywood. We had this conversation a lot about how do we take the amazing tools that we've learned, but also be like normal and actually be able to communicate and love the people that God has put us in there, because we know that God has actually called us to those areas for a reason and a purpose. So
Cool.
We had a lot of conversations over those 2 years on what that actually looks like. And so
Awesome. Okay, cool. Good to hear some of the backstory. And you mentioned you were part of the Circuit Riders in Pasadena, but we'll start off by just where and when did you do your DTS? How did you start your YWAM journey?
Yeah, so I did my DTS right out of high school. That's actually a pretty funny story of how I even did my DTS, because I knew from a young age that I was called to both missions and like to influence government. And so it's this whole journey has actually been a really interesting kind of journey of trying to figure out when and where and timing. And so, I in my senior year of high school, I planned to go right into college and study political science and journalism, actually. And I had this deal with God, right? My dad had suggested that I do a DTS, and I had been involved in a lot of missions trips in high school in my younger years, and was involved with King's Kids, which is, if anyone doesn't know what that is, that's like the YWAM for under 18-year-olds, essentially. So my dad had said, hey, I think that you should pray about doing a DTS. And I was like, I don't want to do a DTS. I want to go right into college. And so, of course, that kind of pricked my mind a little bit. And basically I was like, God, well, I'm only going to do a DTS if I don't get into any of the colleges that I apply to, which, of course, then I didn't get into any of the colleges that I applied to.
God shut the door.
God definitely shut the door. So I did my DTS right after high school. This is 2002 in England, Harpenden, England. And then I did my DTS outreach in Russia.
Oh, wow, okay.
Yeah. So, but then I actually didn't rejoin YWAM until probably 4 or 5 years later. So I went back home, started school, actually dropped out of school after a semester, and then did some other ministry stuff in Colorado for 4 years, and then eventually connected back around with Kona people with Fire and Fragrance, and then that's how I got to Kona.
Okay, and then how long were you in Kona for?
I was
did you remain in YWAM that second time?
Yeah, so I was in Kona for I think just under 4 years, and then from Kona I went to Pasadena. Was in Pasadena for another just under 4 years, and that I
Okay.
officially left YWAM almost 3 years ago in 2016.
Wow. So you spent pretty much 8 to 9 years in YWAM
Yeah, yeah,
in 3 different locations.
yes, basically.
Wow. And what did
Yeah.
you do while you're in YWAM? So you're 4 years in Kona, 4 years in Pasadena. What was kind of the gist of what you were involved with while you were in it?
Yeah, so in Kona, I staffed a DTS and a second level school, and then the majority of my time that I was there, I actually helped pioneer the prayer room in Kona.
Okay.
So I was a part of the team that when I first moved there, the prayer room was just in a really tiny little library. Could only fit about 50, 60 people. And then through a series of events, the Cunninghams had really felt from the Lord that they needed to give the best space on the campus to the prayer room, as just kind of a sign that prayer was at the center of what God was doing in YWAM, and they needed to kind of refocus all of their efforts on that. And so I helped oversee that transition, moving to the bigger room that's in the Go Center. If anyone has been to Kona, they know what that building is. But
Yep.
yeah, so I oversaw that transition, and then kind of helped at that time. Honestly, it we there. I don't know, how do I say this? So it wasn't actually a lot of buy-in from the campus as a whole. That the prayer room was worth it, and that sounds horrible because obviously YWAM is
Practice worship and intercessory prayer.
right. Like obviously, like worship and intercession is one of the core values of YWAM, and Lauren and Dar were always really clear about that. But taking essentially one of the largest meeting spaces on campus and turning it into a prayer room. It was one of the only rooms on campus that was actually air conditioned, which is obviously a huge deal as well.
Huge.
So we had a lot of pushback on the value of that space and what that space was going to be used for, and that there should actually, at that point, people, different schools or ministries on campus, they would obviously pray together and worship together as a team in their own spaces or classrooms. But to actually have like an entire room that was only used for worship and prayer was a little bit of a new concept at that point. So this is back in 2009, 2010.
Yeah.
And so I kind of helped, along with a lot of other people. It definitely wasn't just me, but really helped share the vision of why we really believe that was necessary, what God was calling YWAM to as a whole, and why it was valuable to actually have an entire room that was set aside just for that. So yeah, that was my time in Kona. I also was involved with circuit riders, and I did tons of hospitality on campus. Did some discipleship, one-on-one stuff when there was need for it in DTSs that didn't have enough girl staff, or that kind of stuff. All hands on deck, just like YWAM always is.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and then I moved to Pasadena. There was a group of 7 of us that moved, and that story is incredibly long on how that all happened. But essentially, there was an open door for us to work on or with an organization called the U.S. Center for World Missions, and that is a really old organization. They're the ones that essentially pioneered the term unreached people group. So the guy who started the organization, he penned that term. And before then, there wasn't really the understanding that within nations, there was people groups, and that it wasn't just about bringing the gospel to all nations. It was about bringing the gospel to all people groups. So
all ethnos.
All ethnos, yes, exactly. So essentially, yeah, there was some opportunity for us to do work with them and really pioneer some new exciting things with bringing students into understanding the call to missions. And that was also kind of wrapped around with work that we are doing with circuit riders on college campuses. So
Okay.
the work in Pasadena was really pioneering work. We were basically going in completely fresh, and yeah, we did that for about 4 years. Also working with Lou Engle and Nicole. There was a whole kind of group that were working together to kind of see that happen on the campus.
Yeah. Wow. So it sounds like you did a bunch of different things.
Yes.
Bunch of pioneering, lots of apostolic work, like a good YWAMer.
Right.
Doing new things in new ways.
Yep.
The Cunninghams will be very proud. So it sounds like from the very beginning you were wanting to do missions, but also do government. You went to your DTS in England, then you went to do ministry in Colorado. You went back to YWAM for 8 years. So how did you end up transitioning out of YWAM? Was it to do with the government piece? What was kind of that transitionary period like?
Yeah, so the transition I'm sure most people can experience, was very, very difficult for a lot of different reasons. So in the midst of being in YWAM, and then also in my previous time before I joined YWAM, I had actually gotten a bachelor's in political science, and then I had also got a master's simultaneously online when I was in YWAM, and had just actually really felt like from the Lord that I was supposed to do both of those things. And as much as I loved YWAM, I always felt actually really alive when I was engaging my mind in a really academic way and understanding what was happening in the world through international relations and government. And so back in 2015, 16, I had kind of really start to sense that my time with YWAM was done. I just had really reached kind of the end of where I thought I could really go, and there wasn't a lot of opportunity for me to grow anymore. And so I really began to just pray, kind of seek God about next steps. And honestly, I was also just really burnt out as well at that point, after really running hard for a really long time and being in the basically 9 years of really hardcore pioneering. I was just really tired, and I was just done with ministry, honestly. So I think it was definitely a mix of, like, I knew that God was transitioning me out, but then honestly, if it wasn't God transitioning me out, I was almost transitioning myself out too, because I was just I was just kind of over it. So at the end of that time, I helped organize something called Azusa Now, that was done, a big stadium gathering in Los Angeles back in 2016 with Lou Engle, and the circuit riders were a kind of a huge part of helping put that on. So I was actually doing that full time for about 6 months, and had known that event was kind of an ending point for me, and was really praying about next steps. And essentially through a series of events, and this is such like a typical YWAM thing, but you're praying for God to really open a door. And then about an hour later, I got a phone call from a friend asking me to pray about moving to Kansas City to help to work at an organization called Exodus Cry, that is an anti-trafficking organization, and do operations for them. So yeah, I prayed about it, and then I ended up moving there about a month later, and then was in Kansas City for about a year. It actually didn't end up being a good fit for me, and so that's why I was only there for a year. And that kind of started me on this longer journey of now being in DC. So yeah, it skipped about 2 years there, but essentially that's the short story.
So your transition looked like feeling like you'd reached the end of your limit, or what God was wanted to do in you through the mission of YWAM, through the organization. Then you got this call after praying, you went there, wasn't a good fit. That must have been quite challenging, trying to see it out, feeling like God called you there, but then realizing this isn't a good fit, ending up in DC. So what are you doing now? What's kind of your day-to-day look like? What are you involved with?
Yeah, so my day-to-day is really interesting, actually. So one of the things that happened when I ended my time in Kansas City, I actually decided to pursue a doctorate, so a PhD. So I'm in a PhD program, full-time program. So I do a lot of schoolwork and a lot of reading and writing. But then I also I have two jobs right now. I work with an organization that does research and lobbying for judicial nominations here in America. So we have, for those of you who don't know, we have kind of several levels of judgeships throughout the country. Kind of the Supreme Court is kind of the major one that people talk about, but we have a lot of other levels of judges. So I help kind of do lobbying for judges that would adhere to the Constitution. And then I'm also involved in some national security and defense stuff as well.
That sounds gangster.
Yeah,
What does that even mean? Are you allowed to tell us, or is that confidential?
Yeah, so it's actually a really interesting journey that I'm on right now, because it's not actually a field that I originally had thought I was ever going to get into. But it's actually just the doors that God opened up. But also I had started to be interested in it about 2 years ago as a potential thing for me to do. And it just kind of happened this way. So I'm actually, I was working with a company previously. I'm not there anymore, but they do work essentially connecting emerging technologies. So companies, basically tech companies that have tools that could help the U.S. in defense and national security areas, particularly with getting there's a big disconnect between technology and what's the right word to say? Like technology that could help our warfighters. So there may be, I guess the easiest way to explain it is that there's been circumstances in the past where American soldiers and also soldiers from other countries as well, like allied countries that we are working with overseas, that people have actually died not from enemies, but from essentially when computer code goes wrong. And so they don't have the tools because there was a glitch in the system, or that's probably just the easiest way to explain it in like a really non-technical way. And so there's actually technology that can fix those problems. Or there's technology that's emerging that can fix those problems, that can actually make, this is going to sound weird, but they can actually make war safer and less people die or, have issues with war because of emerging technologies. So I was working with a company that connects little companies to the government to basically say, we have technology that can help you. Wow. I'm actually not at the company anymore for a variety of reasons, but essentially I'm starting a internship at the Department of Defense here in a couple weeks. And I'm going to be working in a field called acquisition and sustainment, which is related to what I was doing before. So it's essentially how does the Department of Defense connect with companies that can help advance the mission of defense and national security.
Wow. So you're actually getting to work in that kind of government sphere that you always thought you were going to work in, but weren't sure how. Did you always think it was going to be this far down the line? Did you think you were going to work in government straight away after high school? How did you kind of see that desire to work in government coming to pass?
Yeah, honestly, that was always a big question mark for me. I always felt the word that I really had from God was that I would influence government. And so that could actually look like a lot of different things. So I never actually had a really clear word that I was going to be working in government and, doing things of that nature. The words that God always gave me were always kind of around government. So that's definitely been part of the journey of trying to figure out what is the role in the job, right? Like I need to make money. And as much as I would just love to disciple people all over the world with no pay, and disciple people in government with no pay, the reality is that when you're in workplaces, you actually have a different level of relationship and discipleship that can happen, which is what I really wanted. So I don't think I actually answered your question. But
No, it was great.
yeah.
So with that view of discipleship, has your view of kind of what ministry looks like changed, or have you always held this view of ministry, but you've only expressed it in the context you're in within YWAM, or like, is your view of ministry evolving, or is it just being lived out now that you're in a different context?
Yeah, I think I've actually always really had this mindset. I think that was always one of my not pain points. That's maybe not the right word, but frustration points in YWAM, actually, that I didn't necessarily feel. There was a lot of training about, like, this is what ministry looks like in this context. And even though there's such a sphere focus, I think it's really hard to train people on how to be in the spheres unless you've been in the spheres. And obviously there are a lot of people that are in the spheres that come back and teach and train, and I think that's really amazing. But I definitely think there's, overall, at least in my experience, there's really a gap with kind of understanding how to do the deal, right? Do the kingdom outside of the missions context. And so that was always kind of something that I was thinking about a lot during my time in YWAM. I was always thinking, how could I apply this somewhere else? And now that I'm here, it's actually like super humbling because you kind of realize those basic concepts that you're taught in YWAM are, basically just Bible and how to love people and how to just live with people. Is like, the incarnational part of the gospel, I think, is actually the most powerful part of the gospel itself. That God is actually the one that came to us, met us where we're at. He didn't demand that we come to him. He came to us. So I think, even though it's a concept that I understood before, I think until you're here, you don't really, like, I guess you have a new level of understanding. Yeah.
You're experiencing that truth, so it's more than just a theoretical. It's, well, I've lived it. I know what it feels like and what it looks like.
Yeah.
Do you have any examples of that, like in your day-to-day work, or like where it would come up, where you could like explain to people, I don't know, how you kind of dealt with it? Or
I don't have like any specific examples, just a lot of like larger conversations that I've had with people over the past little bit. I think specific to work in government, and particularly DC, this city and politics, government, it's all about power. And I think, let me rephrase that. A lot of spheres are about power, right? It's about getting to the top. It's about being successful. So I think there is that element of power in every sphere, but particularly with something like government, where it has the ability to invade every part of people's lives and control people's lives, whether or not you're in we have a democratic system here in America, or you're in a more authoritarian country somewhere else in the world. There's always that elements of power, which, is basically the exact opposite of the kingdom, where it's all about humility. And it's all about not choosing the path of power and authority, but choosing the path of love and humility. So I've definitely been in a lot of conversations with people here, particularly where it's all about, I need to get to this place by this time, and I need to influence, this person. And just being able to say, like, hey, maybe that's not the best way. And it's a really different mindset I have noticed. That's part of walking with Jesus, is that things aren't always black and white. But there definitely is a lot of scripture where Jesus lets people take advantage of him in order that God's power might actually be accomplished. So I don't know. It's hard. It's really hard.
It's tough. It's hard, especially because you can think of Bible verses sometimes, but then, like, a Bible verse is so easy to say, but how do you actually live that out? Because the verse that I'm thinking of is, I forget where it is, I think it might be in 2 Peter. It says, if when you do what is right and suffer for it, if you patiently endure it, this finds favor with God, for you have been called for this purpose, since Christ also suffered for you, leaving you an example for you to follow in his steps, who committed no sin, nor was any deceit found in his mouth. And while being reviled, he did not revile in return, but kept entrusting himself to him who judges righteously. In other words, if you suffer for doing what's right, patiently endure it. Don't fight back. Don't revile in return, and trust, like Jesus did, that God would be his defense.
Right.
But then sometimes that looks like, how do you actually live out that trust in God? Does that look, because the Holy Spirit might be like, that looks like, hey, go and talk to this person, go and share this. Or I might say, keep silent. Because sometimes Jesus kept silent and sometimes Jesus spoke back.
Right. Yeah. So I think
like,
that's why it's so important for us to have a relationship with the voice of God, right? Like, we need to be constantly aware of what he's saying and doing, because that's really the only way to have the knowledge. I think, as much as I love the Bible, you can, we've seen it all throughout history. People take verses from the Bible and then they oppress people groups. There's a lot of bad things that have happened when people use the Bible, actually. And so that's why we have to get the full context of the principles of what God is saying more than anything. And principles seen throughout all of the Bible, not just like one book or one chapter.
Yeah. No, it's so true. I think the Crusades are
right.
a pretty good example, or bad example, I'm not sure, of how the Bible can just be used for man's ego, man's greed, man's selfishness. Yeah. No, it's good. The wrestle of life isn't black and white.
Right.
There isn't really a right or wrong that I can logically determine or rationally determine. How do we go into the Spirit, discern, hear his voice to walk this out in this specific, unique situation? Are there any other kind of, that was a very specific story of kind of hard to know what Jesus would do in this area. Is there any other kind of stories you can think of where it's been like, how do I live as a Christian in this specific example, or within this context, or with this scenario that I'm facing? Can you think of any other stories we've had to wrestle through what to do?
Gosh, that was
something
definitely oh, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, something that might make that easier to answer is like, what has it changed, like from when you first went in to kind of the sphere of government till now? Like, has anything changed for you, like your mindset, like things that you've learned? Like, you thought it was going to be one way, but then after experiencing it, you learned, oh, it doesn't actually look like that, or this is easier than I thought, or this might be harder than I thought.
Yeah.
Good question.
That's a really loaded question. I think, I will definitely honestly say that I probably had a lot more pride than I thought that I did. Which, there you go.
That's a good, honest answer, Anna.
Right. So it's interesting because honestly, in YWAM, especially since I had like advanced degrees, which the reality is that there's a lot of people in YWAM that don't have that have very little education, or I was kind of on the forefront of a lot of pioneering stuff that was happening there. I definitely had more pride than I realized I had. Even though there's always so much talk about humility and it's all about Jesus, blah, blah, blah. I would never have said that I had pride. Or at least if I did, I would have a quick repentance moment and just kind of move on. But to actually, essentially be really well liked and loved and respected in YWAM, and then basically move here, and degrees are honestly like a dime a dozen here, right? Like, I don't know the actual percentage of people here that have advanced degrees, but it's really high. It's probably like 75-80%. So having a master's is not really a big deal here. Most people have masters, or they're lawyers, or there's also a lot of PhDs here. And so I had to come to a a really a quick conclusion that those things, even though they were things that God said to do, and including like my degrees and also, you know, the entirety of my time in YWAM, they're all things that God, I really felt knew that I was supposed to do. But what actually made me different was the Spirit of God inside of me. And I think that that's something that I am still wrestling through, because I so strongly believe that we need to be excellent in everything we're doing and to have the skills and the knowledge, and not count like on the miracle favor to get us there. You know, like we've all heard stories of meeting the right person at a coffee shop, and then all of a sudden you're like in front of the king of, I don't know, some random country, right? Like, you know, we have like BTS stories of that, and I think it's so amazing, and it just shows how God is totally faithful to like accomplish his mission. But the reality is that those actually are like the rare stories, and God actually values, I think, more the process a lot of times than those miracle stories that aren't everyday life. So I think I had to realize I needed to go through the process of like doing the internship. Like, so when I first got here, I did an internship with the senator. And I mean, that was honestly like humility central. I was, you know, like, you know, I was in a doctoral program. I had essentially been in leadership for most of my adult life. You know, been to all of these countries and had all these experiences. And I am now taking, you know, people on tours of the Capitol building and answering phone calls from constituents and getting yelled at from people that, you know, don't like what the president is doing or don't like what's happening in Congress. And you know, like going around the office and reloading paper in the printers, and, you know, running errands for people. And it really was like, okay, God, like, I kind of thought I was gonna like meet somebody, and then I was gonna get propelled and have all this favor, and I am here, you know, kind of in this this like Joseph moment of like,
I was just thinking of Joseph,
you know,
literally. I was thinking, should I bring up Joseph?
Right. Yeah. Like, and I honestly still think that, right? Like, because I'm doing another internship that's not paid. So even though there's clearly favor and God is providing, but it's just not the way that I thought. And so, actually, when I moved here, I moved here last January, 2018. And so I was praying about, you know, my time here and moving. And I heard this phrase from God. He said that weakness is the way. And as soon as, this is funny, but as soon as I heard that, I literally just started crying. Because I was like, no, because I know what that means. And I know that that's really hard. And I want to be the person that has that crazy story of, you know, walking into the right place at the right time and then being propelled and working next to someone that, you know, where everyone knows my name and everyone knows their name. And God just saying like, hey, I actually know your heart and know that that actually would kill you. And I am more dedicated to the process of you being healthy and you walking in the fullness of what I've called you to do, even if it takes you longer to get there than you think it should. Plus, I mean, if we could just be honest, like, media does not help in this situation, right? Like, you watch movies about, you know, people, I don't know, like, you know, stupid Hallmark movies or Netflix or whatever. Like, it's always like the perfect picture, right? Like, you meet the guy and then all of a sudden you're 11 and you get married like the next day, or, you know, you meet the right person at the right time and then all of a sudden, you know, you're like the next famous actor. Or like, the world sets us up for being disappointed, where if we actually look at scripture, God actually sets us up to be content in the process, and to trust him in the process. So that's definitely been sort of my journey with that.
Yeah. So
That's
to try and summarize everything you just said, it sounds like even if you've been in YWAM for 8 years, that we can all still have pride, that even if we're in an environment that's all about exhibit servant leadership, serve, go low, keep short accounts, that we can still be blind to areas of pride, and it's still a process. And we leave YWAM, we expect God to use us in these miraculous ways because we've heard miraculous stories, and we just expect for the shortcuts, for the favor, because sometimes we think that results are the most important thing to God. Results, and I quote with my fingers, my invisible fingers you can't see. It's like results are what God really wants, but then it seems like as we leave, and I've experienced this too, more so than God putting us next to kings or seeing us on influential things and making great impacts, it seems like the lowly in man's eyes task of continuing for Christ to be formed in us, it seems to be God's number one priority. That He wants to remove pride, remove anything that we're leaning on that's not of Him, that's our own glory, our own strength, our own degrees, our own anything, our own experience, our own travels, our own. And He's like, weakness is the way. And I've experienced the same thing of like, I left YWAM and I was like, I'm going to change the world. I have been humbled, and now I am a man of humility, and the humble will be exalted. I declare that promise out loud. It's going to happen. And then I had to like work in a job that I hated for a whole year, just serving in something that wasn't my giftings, that wasn't my personality, that was like absolutely the most stressful thing I've ever experienced. And that was what happened, like the process that God had me on. Yeah. Immediately after I left YWAM, I was like, more humility training, more process. I thought I was ready. I thought I was coming out of the prison and into the king's chambers to interpret his dreams.
Right.
So those expectations sometimes get the best of us, and it sounds like the process, what you're saying, is what God values the most.
Right.
That was such a good answer, Anna. I think that will help so many people, and you explained it so well. Like, you have such wisdom in this sphere thing. Like, as you're talking, I'm like, no wonder Christina kept saying we should interview her. Like, it's just, when you're talking, it's so profound but so simple at the same time. And I think it's so what us YWAMers need in that transition is understanding, like you said, that expectation. And life is like, okay, now I'm gonna step over here and meet the right person, then I'm gonna be famous, and it's all gonna happen so quickly. But you explained it so, like, you've done this really well. That's what I felt as you were talking. Like, God is just saying, you have done this so well. And I think because you've done it so well now, like, you're going to last. You're going to be able to...
Oh, prophesy, Kelty. Keep going.
So many years doing it. So it's just what I felt.
Oh, come on.
But I think you're going to be able to spend so many years in it because at the beginning you have chosen humility and you've just listened to His voice so intently and just the everyday, minute to minute. And I'm excited for you. Like, your future, it's going to be awesome. And I think a large part of that is because you've done this part so well. Like, I'm very encouraged listening to how you're doing it. I'm like, wow, this is just such good tips, wisdom. It's so encouraging. So good job.
Thank you so much. That means a lot.
And when you get famous, then we can be like, hey, we know Anna Cavoto. We know her. And then we can puff up our ego because we know you. We're like, hey, we knew her before God exalted her into the king's chambers. So we're pretty pumped right now.
Oh, thanks.
And also one thing you said, which sounds like one of the massive keys, is just, it's all about hearing God's voice. Discerning. There's no formulas. There's no like shortcuts. There's just His presence. There's just leaning into Him. What's He saying in this unique situation? There's no black or white answer. I can't just follow what someone else has done or what this person's done or what someone's done before me, or I can't compare myself to this person's story that they got exalted straight away after YWAM or whatever. What is God saying to me? Yeah. And that seems to be the one of the keys that sounds like you're saying to succeed in the spheres.
Yeah, I don't think I can honestly emphasize that enough. I think comparison is what will kill us because we think we have an idea of what God wants because of what He's done through other people.
Yeah.
But that's not what we see through Scripture, right? Like, if you look at all of the different ways that God deals with people all throughout Scripture, he does it according to the way that He made them, right? Because He knows what we can handle and He knows what we need. So I think it is a place of coming into trust and faith that God actually knows the best thing for us, which is, that's like such a Christianese thing to say.
Yeah.
For sure. But like, I've literally said that a billion times in so many, like one-on-ones. Like, you just need to trust what God has for you. But so I don't want people to just discount that. But I think it's more when you've experienced heartbreak because you've tried to do things on your own and tried to do things out of what other people thought was best, not out of the peace that was in your heart, which I have definitely done that. Like, I think that I can really, really, truly say that I am really stoked about the journey that God has me on, even though it's literally not what I thought what was going to happen.
Yeah. So we're going to wrap it up because we could talk to you all day, it sounds like. So we're going to finish with 2 pieces of advice that you could give other YWAMers in the spheres. It sounds like one is just, hey, it sounds like a Christian platitude. Just trust God, hear his voice. What has he got for you? What would be your other kind of piece of advice that you would leave with YWAMers in the spheres that are listening to this podcast?
Yeah, so one thing that I actually think is really important, this is like super practical, is something that I did was that I actually hired somebody to write my resume. And I actually have a career coach that I'm actually currently meeting with. Because obviously in YWAM we have like a very certain language that we use, which is amazing. But 99% of the time that language doesn't translate to the world. And to essentially, I would say, I'm pretty confident to say that's like every sphere it doesn't translate to. So I actually spent hours and hours doing research online, looking at job postings of things I wanted to do, and basically using the language that they used in those resumes to retrain my brain how to talk about my YWAM experiences. So, like when we talk about things that we've done on DTS outreaches or just in our roles, we can talk about things like community development, and which is not a word that is really broad in YWAM. I think we do use it a little bit, but like humanitarian aid, operations, and like instead of using administration, like I was an administrator in YWAM, right? Like I use the word operations and strategy and strategic planning, because those are words that the world understands what those means, right? So if we communicate in a way that people don't understand, it doesn't actually matter how awesome we are. Like, we have to meet them where we're at. And then
which is like God and humanity. So
right, exactly. So, and that's actually why I invested in a career coach, because I realized the lack that I had in my own mind of how to communicate, but also how to actually, things like networking and being able to go actually talk through the process of my past with somebody and what I have previously done, and actually have that one-on-one relationship with somebody that says like, okay, these are 5 things I need you to do this week that will move forward your career. I personally, I think it's also my personality, right? Like, I need somebody to be like, get your act together. I need you to do these 5 things. So, but I think it's sometimes like the really practical things like that we forget about. And also that's investing money, which, coming out of YWAM, I didn't have very much money at all. And so it was really hard for me to say like, oh, I'm going to spend $1,000 to work with a career coach for 6 months. But that's been money that's been well invested in my mind.
Yeah, that's huge. And it's humility as well, asking for help.
Yeah, totally. I would say my second one has to do with the culture of YWAM and the culture of the kingdom where we're at. So we have to recognize that our time in YWAM wasn't wasted, which is something I actually really dealt with a lot. Like, I'm trying to like basically start a second career, right? YWAM was my first career. And, you know, I'm 36 and essentially I'm starting over. So it's definitely the thought has crossed my mind of like, man, I wasted my 20s. I wasted all those years. And just recognizing like, okay, God, I don't believe that. That's totally a lie. That's not from Jesus. That's from Satan. Like nothing is wasted.
Yeah.
So the culture of YWAM, the culture of the kingdom are things that the spheres need, right? And so being able to apply those culture pieces to where I'm at is actually what makes me really powerful. And having a really broader view of the world, which it's interesting because even in the sphere that I'm in, that is literally all about what's happening around the world, it's really surprising that a lot of people don't have a broad view of the world. And that's something that YWAM is actually really good at. You know, those kind of cross-cultural experiences and really having a value for every single nation and culture. That's something that we can actually bring to the world that is really valuable.
Yeah, so true.
That's good.
Okay, awesome. And secret last question, as I just thought of it. You may not know the answer, but what's your Myers-Briggs and your Enneagram?
I'm actually like obsessed with all of these things. So my Myers-Briggs is INFP. And then my Enneagram is an 8 with a 7 wing.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
That will be.
Anna, I'm an INFP too.
Oh, yay.
Nice to...
I'm an ESTJ, so I'm the opposite of you guys. And I'm a 3, and Kelty's a
Honestly, listening
6.
to you though, I was like, oh, she's definitely like an ISTJ. She's a boss, like administrative, organized woman.
Yeah. Well, the funny thing is that so here's my secret. Like when I am in school and when I am in really administrative positions, my Myers-Briggs actually comes out as an ISTJ.
ISTJ.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
you adapt.
I adapt to where I am, but I think my natural state is an INFP. Which actually, if you kind of look at the Enneagram, it makes sense that I'm an 8 with a 7 wing, because in health you go to 2, which I think is a lot more of what INFP is.
Yeah.
So.
Wow. Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
You really got some insight into your personality. Yeah.
I've been, I just been on this journey of trying to get healthy in every way. So that, definitely doing the work to understand how God created us, I think is really important.
Yeah, so true.
Amen.
What a great line to finish on. Anna Cavoto, all the way from Washington, D.C. I sound like a news correspondent right now, so I'm pretty excited. Thanks so much for giving us an hour of your time.
Yes, thank you so much,
It
Anna.
was
It
awesome.
was amazing. It was so good.
And I believe that's going to help a lot of people as they listen in
Absolutely.
and apply what you've learned and see that this is normal what they're experiencing, and some practical tips there at the end of how they can practically move forward. So thanks so much.
Awesome. Thank you guys so much. I had such a great time. It's so much fun.
Oh, good.
Awesome.
Yay.
Well, we'll see you later.
All right.
Have a
Bye.
good day.
Well, that's all for now. We hope you were encouraged by today's interview. If you aren't already doing so, follow us at YWAM Spheres on Instagram, join our Facebook group, and check out our website to find more resources to help you thrive in the spheres.
Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next time.